Today, we're going to dive into a topic that, let's be honest, is often talked about in whispers, especially in faith communities. We're talking about depression. It's a really personal, often painful struggle, and we're going to explore what it means to find hope, real hope, right in the middle of it. So let's get into it.
Wow. Just take that in for a second. This is a real quote from a pastor who went through depression himself. And if you've ever been in that dark place, you may have heard something similar. This idea that depression is just a sin you need to stop, or a sign of weak faith, well, it can just pile on the guilt and make you feel completely alone. So our goal here is to cut through that noise with some clarity and compassion. So, what exactly are we talking about when we say depression? This is so much more than just feeling sad or having a bad week. The sources use this incredible phrase, embodied emotional suffering. I think that nails it. It's not just in your head. It's an experience that can take over your entire body, messing with your energy, your sleep, even how you think. And if this is something you're dealing with, please hear this. You are not, by any stretch of the imagination, alone. More than 1 in 20 American adults are treated for this. It's so prevalent, it's been called the common cold of the soul. And that number really shows you just how true that is.
Now, here's where things get really interesting, especially for people of faith. There's this myth that if your faith is strong enough, you're somehow immune to depression. But that idea just completely falls apart when you actually look at the Bible. Turns out, some of the greatest heroes of the faith walked through the exact same kind of darkness. You're in very, very good company. Let's start with Job. This is a man God himself described as righteous and blameless. And after he loses everything, his suffering is so deep, so all-consuming, that he wishes he'd never been born. I have no peace, only turmoil. This wasn't a man with weak faith. This was a man with incredible faith, being absolutely crushed. And then there's Elijah. Talk about emotional whiplash. He comes off this huge, fiery, miraculous victory on Mount Carmel, a massive spiritual high. And what happens next? He completely crashes. He's running for his life, terrified, and ends up under a tree begging God to just end it all. It just goes to show you, spiritual victories don't make us bulletproof against emotional lows.
Or what about King David? The Bible calls him a man after God's own heart. Yet you read the Psalms, and they are filled with his honest cries of pain. He talks about being bowed down greatly, groaning from the turmoil of his heart. His willingness to be so raw and real is such a gift because it teaches us that faith isn't about putting on a happy face, it's about being honest with God no matter how messy it is.
And we see it again with Jeremiah, the weeping prophet. His life's work was filled with rejection and heartache, and his pain was so intense that just like Job, he cursed the very day he was born. The Bible doesn't try to hide this stuff. It puts this raw human emotion right out there for us to see.
And this thread doesn't just stop in the Old Testament. The Apostle Paul wrote about despairing even of life. Martin Luther, the great reformer, had these dark periods he called his temptations. And Charles Spurgeon, maybe one of the most famous preachers of all time, was incredibly open about his lifelong battle with crippling depression, which he famously called his black dog.
So if these giants of the faith walk through this, it's pretty clear this is a complex issue. There's no single, simple cause. So to help us get our heads around it, the sources kind of break down the potential reasons into 3 big, often overlapping categories.
So those categories are spiritual, situational, and biological. Now the key thing to remember is that these aren't neat little separate boxes. For most people, it's more like a mix of all 3. They all weave together to create a person's unique struggle with depression.
Let's start with the spiritual. Now, the Bible is clear that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, our inner pain can be a direct result of our choices. King David is the perfect example. After his sin with Bathsheba, he tried to hide it, and he says it felt like his bones were literally wasting away. That unconfessed guilt was a heavy weight that crushed him physically and emotionally.
Second, there's situational depression. This is just a natural human response to pain and loss in a broken world. Think about Hannah in the Old Testament. She was weeping so much she couldn't even eat. Was that because of sin? No, it was because of her grief over not being able to have children. Grief, trauma, loss, these things wound us, and it's normal to feel that deep sorrow.
And third, we have biological factors. This is so important to understand because this is where we see depression as a real illness, not a spiritual failing. You can think of it like heart disease or diabetes. It can be linked to your brain chemistry, to genetics passed down through your family, to major hormonal shifts, or the constant grinding weight of a chronic illness. Acknowledging this is a massive step toward getting rid of the stigma.
So this brings us to the main point. We absolutely have to tear down this harmful myth that says if you just had enough faith, you wouldn't be depressed. It's just not true. It's not biblical, and it's not what we see in church history. The fact is, the very people we often look up to as pillars of faith were the ones who battled the most profound darkness.
Okay, so understanding the reality of depression is step one, but the crucial question is, where do we go from here? The good news is, the sources don't just leave us with the problem. They point us toward a real path forward, a path toward hope.
This verse from Jeremiah, of all people, the weeping prophet, is just so powerful. He spends pages and pages lamenting his suffering, and then right in the middle of it, he makes a choice. He says, "Yet this I call to mind." He deliberately chooses to remember who God is, his love, his compassion, even when his feelings are screaming the exact opposite. That choice, that is the anchor of hope. So how do we put that into practice? Well, here are some really practical steps. It starts with just being honest about what you're experiencing, then trying to figure out the roots. Is this spiritual, situational, biological? From there, you dig into your faith, get into Scripture, especially the Psalms, and you choose to act on what's true, even when your feelings aren't on board. But it's also about taking care of your whole self, your sleep, exercise, your relationships, and this is critical. See a doctor. Getting professional help isn't a lack of faith. It's an act of incredible wisdom. And here's a really crucial piece of wisdom. Healing is a process. It's rarely a lightning bolt moment. The Bible encourages us to wait, to be patient, trusting that help is coming, even if it's not on our timetable. Hope isn't the absence of a struggle. Hope is the belief that the struggle doesn't get the final say.
So we'll end with this question, the very same one Jeremiah asked himself. When you're in the thick of it, when the darkness feels overwhelming, what truth about who God is, about his promises, about his love for you, what truth can you deliberately, intentionally call to mind? Because holding on to that truth is often the very first step toward finding the light again.